Yeah, so for our first keynote speaker is from Johnathan Mell, so who is an assistant professor from the Department of Computer Science in the University of Central Florida, USA. So his top title is Conflict Resolution and Negotiation with Social Virtual Agents.
Right.
Yeah, Johnathan, please take away.
Stop sharing my screen so that, Johnathan, you can share yours.
Hey. Hello. All right, how's that? Everybody seeing a slideshow? Great.
Yes.
All right, getting some thumbs up.
Yes, we can.
So, let's go ahead and get in here. Okay, well, first, thank you very much for having me and for inviting me to this workshop. It's very exciting to be here for me. It's evening here on the East Coast on Sunday, and I'm very excited to share some work and some insights and hopefully spur some discussion on conflict resolution and negotiation with social virtual agents. So to start things off, first of all, I want to say that I am not in any way a roboticist. I am a human-computer interaction person. So as was just mentioned to begin with, we're interested, or at least I'm interested in bringing together fields that may have historically been more separate, but we increasingly have to do a lot of the same kinds of topics. So I've tried to distill a non-controversial, somewhat non-controversial definition with the caveat that it's my interpretation, that we're interested in, social agents combining emotional models with artificial intelligence to solve practical problems. So there's a few things to unpack there. We're talking about social agents, we're talking about emotion, we're talking about AI. So what is emotion? Well, there's a lot of great models out there to understand what social emotion is and what social communication entails. But one important piece to note here is that, I'm sorry, I seem to be having issues. If I can just kind of a minute.
So you're still on the slides with social communication compresses.
Yes, let me just try and get this. Okay, so social communication comprises emotion, which is to say that when we are communicating with other people, there's a lot of different things going on. It's not just the words that we're using, but it's the emotion and everything else. So humans increasingly use social agents. We're using them more and more. We have virtual assistants like Siri, Cortana, Google, Alexa, customer service agents that are trying to navigate us through menus and assist us, and e-commerce bots, things that are bidding for us, things that are engaging in commerce. And this has only become more so since more remote work at home has happened over the last couple of years. So we're using agents that understand us and can interact with other social entities like other agents or like humans. So what this means is that together we have sort of a confluence of work between CS and cognitive science and business literatures, and it's really where agents have begun to meet empiricism. So we're trying to build from this. So on the computer science side of things, we have a lot of great work on developing strategic agents. So AIs that can reason about the actions, the game theoretic actions of other players, other entities. Unfortunately, a lot of that's based on game theory and is lacking a lot of the sort of social cognitive aspect of things. Or it relies on pure end-to-end learning. Now, although there have been a great deal of advancements in systems built on end-to-end learning, the problem is that there's not really a unified architecture for addressing problems of negotiation and teaming. And this end-to-end learning is very opaque. It doesn't suit well with existing models of social learning. Now, on the cognitive science side and sort of the business literature, there are people that are interested in organizational behavior, we have also some good news. Lots of great work has been done on behavioral modeling of social games, including negotiation and other complicated things. But it doesn't easily translate to computational systems, very easily. So we have to work to build those together. A lot of my work and a lot of the work that I encourage the field to embrace is based on human studies. So bringing people into the lab or engaging with them virtually and having them interact with real world agents. And the problem with the historical way of doing this in the cognitive science community is that the studies are very scripted. They're not interactive. You're not actually working with something because you're trying to emphasize consistency. Or they're very, very interactive, but you will be, finding them very hard to control. They'll rely on having confederates or very high trained actors or something to try and engage and create a social situation. So this gap between all of these subfields and with HRI as well is a collaborative problem, right? There's all of these different sub-issues that we're trying to do. We need to have a community of research, an industry, government, and academia that can try and address some of these sub-problems, which range from natural language to trust and reputation to training to user modeling. Solving social agents generally requires us to solve these sub-problems. When we add in HRI, we have additional problems that are ones that require a great deal of thought, from robot vision and locomotion on the practical side to even just embodiment, which is the degree to which people are engaging with the system because it has a physical representation of what it is, or because it's an avatar on a screen that has realistic human-like qualities. So contrary to popular belief in HCI, we do care about embodiment, but normally we're looking at the difference between a chatbot and something that's more sophisticated on the screen, but it's still a set of additional problems to tap on. So how do we address this? Well, I would argue that the key research loop here to sort of advance the field is to build some state-of-the-art agents, advance the state-of-the-art by building more agents, and then using those agents to gain insight on human behavior. So deploying them in the real world, gathering information on how people interact with them. To accomplish both of these, we need frameworks to study how humans compete, collaborate, and team together, which is the focus of my work. So to sort of explore these topics, I'm going to present 4 vignettes of conflict and negotiation. I'm going to go through them each fairly briefly, but hopefully with something that will allow us to sort of see some collaboration and advancement opportunities. So our first one is to look at negotiation as a recurrent value proposition problem. So what does it mean to not just engage with negotiation with someone once, but to do it multiple times? Building on that, we are very interested in how we actually build a team. So negotiation, we think of that as a conflict-ridden type of thing where we're trying to build up and compete against another player. But often you will be engaging in more than just bilateral negotiations where you have a team of people. And trying to understand how we can build the best team is very important. Of course, we have to get into human emotion, the social side of things. So emotions that are less talked about, but still play a huge role in conflict resolution. Risk, spite, other messy human aspects become very important. And then I have one last vignette where I'll be discussing deploying a real system in a medical context, which I know is something that this group is particularly interested in. So how do we study these social dilemmas? Let's look at negotiation as a challenge problem. So some years ago, I built a platform. This platform is called IAGO, for Interactive Arbitration Guide Online. What is IAGO? Well, what it is a system that allows us to run experiments that allow us to recruit lots of real human participants and have them interact. Looks like this. So this is an online platform for human agent interaction. So there's a couple of features that I will point out here. We have a version of an embodied agent. We have a representation. This one is using a human-like avatar, but we also have others that varying art styles and levels of realism. There's what is a fairly familiar looking chat box here. So we have language interaction. We aren't forgetting emotion. We have the ability to send emojis back and forth to express ourselves. We have a number of menus where we can say things to the agent. And then over here is sort of a grid. In this particular task, we're looking for if people can figure out how to divide a number of objects between two players. So determine who gets which ones. This is a very customizable system. I use it for a number of different types of experiments, and it's widely used at this point through lots of different universities and competitions. If you're using Iago, feel free to let me know. With that context in mind, let's take a look at reputation. So reputation is sort of a stand-in for what we would call a recurrent value, which is the idea that, well, it's not just good enough to be successful in a given conflict, successful in a given negotiation. We want to maximize our value over the lifetime of that relationship. And in so doing, we need to look at concepts like reputation to say, well, how much is this going to affect what I am looking to do in the future? How much is my action now, even if it wins me the interaction, how much is that going to affect whether somebody wants to engage with me in the future or what actions they will take? So this was the subject of work at the Automated Negotiating Agents competition in 2021. We were focusing in that task, in that competition, which is a competition that I assist in running that allows people to submit their agents and have them compete against real people. We were focused on the ideas of user choice and agency, giving players the chance to determine who they want to negotiate with and if they want to negotiate with our agents. So this task was what's called a multi-issue bargaining task. Again, it was the idea that we had a number of objects. In this case, they were import-export goods, so iron and gold and fruits and various things. We were trying to split them across the table. So you get some and I get some. But notably, this was a repeated negotiation. So you had the opportunity to engage with the agent multiple times, not just once. And it was fairly short interactions, about 7 minutes for each negotiation. But the human players could choose to walk away. So if you maximized your points in the first game as the agent, it might not be the winning strategy if you couldn't convince people to come back to the table. In this particular competition, we had, we had a number of different competitors. I think we had 13 different agents that were run. What you're seeing on the y-axis here is the total points earned by each agent. And we had a nice widespread, lots of different strategies that were employed. But we had one agent that sort of stood out from the crowd in being very successful. And what I want to point out here in this little vignette is that this agent, in the next graph I'm going to show you, is very similar in looking at the top agents. So in this case, what you're looking at is a very similar type of spread here. Again, we have our top performing agent, but here we're looking at the number of agents that were able to successfully get people to come back to the table, right? So in this case, being good at that, getting over 80% of people to come back and engage with the agent when they didn't have to, was a very successful strategy, and we were able to show that was a very important thing for being highly effective. So just some thought-provoking questions around this. What does it take to lose a user? And I'll put this in other contexts, or a teammate or a customer if you're a business. What are the kinds of mistakes or problems or actions you can take that will cause you to lose them? And if you do, how long does it take to repair a reputation, if it's possible at all, right? So quantifying that becomes very key to figuring out how to maximize the benefit over time. I also present that the ecology of agents, of alternatives, of other agents that are available makes a big difference on this, right? What are your other options? So my second vignette is going to look at the idea of team effectiveness, right? So this is sort of a way of looking indirectly at reputation, or at least looking at the degree to which you have a quantity explaining how well you could work with others. So this was something that we devised a metric for, and was presented earlier this year, called the Harmony Index. And what the Harmony Index is, it's a measure of team strength. So it's a measure of how well you and another person, whether that be a human or an agent or a robot, work together to accomplish a task. So the math behind this, effectively, we're looking at a root of the probability of you succeeding with a teammate over the probability of you succeeding if that teammate were not included. So this is a formula that describes how you calculate the harmony index for a dyad, for a pair of people, but it can also be used for any arbitrary size and team. Now, this is a metric. It's a metric that we felt was very useful because a lot of times in team science and discussing the social implications of how well agents interact with each other, it's very difficult because we lack really good metrics for even saying how well you as a team did. You know, we can say, well, the team won, the team lost, the team did well, didn't do well. We know the individuals when acting on their own are pretty good, but how do we know that the team's effective? This metric has some nice features. This is it centered around 1, and we're seeing a normal curve there. So this is a distribution across a real data set of about 3,000 to 2,500, I think, interactions of team members playing an online game. And so it has some really nice features, and then it is it's a strong metric statistically speaking. Yes, so we had 2,890 pairs in this particular data set. It was taken from an online strategic team-based game. So what can the Harmony Index be used for? Well, one thing that is very interesting is that it allows you to classify teams into one of 4 types. So the 4 types that we describe here are ones where both individuals win percentages go up. So that's our WW class, win-win. We have ones where both go down. So that's our lose-lose category. So these are the most common categories, which is to say that if you're a good teammate and I'm a good teammate, chances are we'll do better together. So this is what we call our harmony or our disharmony classes, where you just make each other better or you make each other much worse. What is less common, but still very prevalent, are situations where one player's success rate goes up, but the other participants, the other team members' success rate goes down. However, we further subdivide that, those win-loss conditions, into positive and negative ones. So in this case, the WL positive class, that would be when one team member's success rate goes up so much that the loss of the success rate for the other player is insignificant, right? The overall team does better, even though the individual may be doing worse. Same, just the reverse for WL minus, we're looking at ones where, yes, we did improve someone's performance slightly, but overall, this was a negative. So decomposing this metric into these classes means that it's very easy to discuss and understand how the Harmony Index can be interpreted in a particular team dynamic, right? If you're in a WL situation, maybe it's due to a recent change or a new member of the team, and you could say, okay, well, they're sort of dragging us down in a particular way. So it allows us to quantify things. This is from upcoming work, but we've also shown now that the Harmony Index, as I said, works for arbitrary size n, and it's also very correlated with a win rate, and can be shown to be very good, even predictively speaking. So looking at how potentially effective a team would be, even if that team has not appeared in the data set. So this kind of team metric analysis gives us several avenues that are interesting to explore. Can we predict team effectiveness from, from other markers? How is this team effectiveness transmitted as a form of reputation? Right? How can people be aware of this? Does this make it easier to tell people, yes, this is a very effective team? And a question is, from the social side, is, well, how do humans attend to these metrics? Arguably, it's less obvious when you are in these middle classes where you could say, well, hey, I'm doing better, but overall the team is doing worse. And if you present these sorts of metrics to people, are they more able to bias themselves to thinking that they're in particular types of classes? I do see some questions in the chat. I will answer them at the end. And then, yes, can we use this as something for a model for teaming? So the third little vignette that I want to explore is the role of human emotions in past conflict. Right? So this is tying certain things together. This is tying the idea of, well, we have, it's important to negotiate with time. It's important to consider these ideas of reputation in conflict situations. This one is more of a direct analog for conflict. So there is a classic board game from, I believe it's the 1970s. It's called Diplomacy. It's an active area of research, and it's both through the automated negotiating agents competition and more broadly through the HCI field. But effectively, in diplomacy, it is a map of Europe, Greater Europe, and you have various powers represented by the different colors on this map, and they are moving around different units and armies and trying to take over and become the dominant power. But the problem is that it's very, very hard to succeed because unlike other types of games, board games, there's no chance in diplomacy. There's no dice rolling or anything like that. It's only determined by the result of secret army movements that are taking place simultaneously by all powers. So if you happen to attempt to take the same country as someone else and you do not have more units there than the other player, then you will both fail and you will not make any progress on either of your goals. So it's a game that heavily, heavily encourages people to engage in diplomacy, to discuss with each other their plans, and to make those plans convincing because there's no enforcement mechanism whatsoever. You're free to lie to your heart's content. So we are currently, this is some ongoing work that we're looking at right now, building agents that are capable of engaging in the social dynamics necessary to be good at this game. But within diplomacy, we're looking at some very fine-grained scenarios. So here's a zoom in on a particular part of the map of diplomacy. And there are several such locations where this could be the case. But in this scenario, we're looking in at a particular area on the map. The colors represent the countries as they are currently controlled. And what has just happened here is the red player has just moved their army into the Warsaw territory, and they have now taken it, and it will turn red on the next turn if they put their army in there. And so what this means is that we could say, well, the blue player has now suffered a loss, right? And what should be their response? The dots on the map represent territories that have supply centers, which is to say they're more important. So because of this particular setup here, you can see that the blue player has an army that they can respond. They could move into the unoccupied Berlin territory. And this is, in some ways, objectively the best move because they will be able to gain a significant territory. It's not possible for the red player to move their army in time to respond to that. So they will simply get ahead. However, what we're interested in is whether, based on the events that have previously transpired, which have been harmful, red attacking blue, red creating this conflict, engendering these feelings of spite, whether the blue player will instead attempt to take Silesia and move over into this country. Now, in this case, that's somewhat objectively a bad move. It's a less significant territory. The benefit of taking it, if successful, is less. And the Red Army could potentially interfere with this plan. But as I said, a big part of HCI and the work that we do is trying to ground things into real human behaviors, not idealized ones. So we can look at this from a game theoretic perspective all day and say, oh, well, everybody should just go to Berlin. But our hypothesis is that by manipulating certain variables here, we're going to find that that's not always the case. So lots of exploratory questions here. Of course, we're interested in how risk and feelings of conflict interact over time. And this is a big area of study for personality and individual difference. So if you're interested in those, happy to discuss that as well. My last vignette, this one is a real practical one that's going to be deployed very soon. This is joint work in conjunction with Northwestern University, and this is a case study on medical conflict resolution. So what we're working on right now is building a system that would be an AI-based negotiation curriculum for family caregivers. So what is that? Well, in the States particularly, but globally, there is a growing need for medical caregivers, specifically family caregivers that can provide light medical assistance at home and can effectively help older adults who may be less able to do so navigate a medical system. Unfortunately, there are very, very few training programs for family members to receive this that they aren't medical professionals. So this is an attempt to build a system that would provide that training by discussing strategies to diffuse conflict that can often be very acrimonious when you're talking to your parent or your sibling about a parent's care, and trying to train people to be better at that. So Iago makes another appearance here in modified format. And what we're looking at in this case is, again, a type of embodied older adult agent that you're trying to convince to do something. But here, instead of negotiating over objects that we're moving around on the table, we are talking through various pre-selected sort of discussion points and things where you could try and persuade the agent. We also notably expose the agent's mental state using this little meter, which will go up as you're more and more persuasive to the agent. And so we're hopeful that this is going to be able to show that this training can be very effective. Of course, that's one of our primary questions, which is how effective is the recurrence of this agent role-playing effectively events to be to give actual actionable improvements, and how does the insight into the opponent's state of mind affect that training? So being able to see the dial here. All right. So I started out with these four vignettes that I wanted to discuss. Negotiation as this recurrent value problem, building the best team possible to succeed, looking at risk and spite and other things, and then talking about employing real medical interventions. So I will leave you now today with sort of 4 suggestions of ways that we can take some of this work and turn it into useful things for the field, to the advanced field, for to continue answering these questions. The first one is, if we're looking at recurring value propositions, we should consider running longitudinal studies. I know they're much harder than one-off ones, but they give us a lot more useful data about how people want to continue to interact with agents, either virtual or robotic. If we're building teams, we want to build them with effective and reproducible metrics. There's often a lot of discussion about having reproducibility issues in social type experiments. And so drilling down to base principles and creating good effective metrics that allow us to compare apples to apples is very important. Risk and spite and these other emotional feelings, of course, very interesting. And it's very important that we consider real human behavior in context, because many, many small changes to scenarios, to domains. I've shown you a medical interaction today and a board game interaction today. and several pieces that are very different. And so really applying these lessons in the context that they're going to be used is important. And then finally, gathering these data from deployed systems. So it's not merely enough to see how it performs in the lab, we need to get it out there and show how it can be used in an engineered system. So those are my light suggestions on ways that we can continue to bring HRI and HCI together. And I know that there are a couple of questions in the chat, which I will address now. And thank you again for your time and for having me today. Getting some nods and some virtual claps, so we're gonna assume that's good. All right, and I'm sorry about the slight weirdness with the slides. I think it was trying to auto advance. But I have a question from Vitor Silva, which was a question about Iago, and if the negotiations are only measured by tracking the conversation done in a text way. Is it also capable of tracking people's voices or facial expressions? Good question. So Iago tracks a great many things. Of course, the text of what's spoken to the agent, the emojis that are self-reported by the player, and a number of other variables. We've got 120 something odd variables by default that it tracks. However, it does not track voices and facial expressions in its default form. Mostly that is for privacy and anonymity reasons. However, I will let you know that there is a version of Iago that does have webcam enabled. Now, Iago is not attempting to do the actual tracking itself. There's lots of other great software out there that does that very well, but it does allow you to access the video screen if the player has consented to that, to allow for more of a Zoom-like experience where you can see them, and that information is capable of being passed into the API. It's not in the current version. It's on that's publicly available right now, but it is something we've been working on for a while because it has been a recurrent question of whether we can get those multimodal data streams into this platform. Thank you. Good question.
Do we have any other questions from our participants? You can just unmute yourself and ask your question. So if not, I do have a question. So you mentioned we need to measure those in like more natural settings, right? Like, for example, some field studies maybe. So do you want to maybe give some starting point to measure those, like the theory that you just talked
about? Sure. So if I understand the question, you're talking about how I have emphasized that collecting data in situ, increasing the ecological validity is very important. Yeah. So some suggestions. So certainly, a lot of the agents, both the ones that we've seen developed by others through the automated negotiating agents competition, as well as those that we ourselves have developed, they use existing models of, say, personality, emotion, appraisal theory, to determine their mental states. However, the very nature of those sorts of models is that they're very parameterized, right? You can put in a different personality in agent and it should have a very different effect. Thankfully, we're able to learn a lot of these models from watching players and being very individualized. So for example, we look at a measure called Machiavellianism a lot, which is sort of a measure for how ruthless and aggressive you're going to be in a negotiation. And there has been great work that has been shown that you can learn that sort of thing and use it to live parameterize your agent. So if you build agents that are based on theoretical models, there's a lot of things that you can learn on the fly and then use those to create adaptive behavior in the agents. That would be sort of recommendation number one. And then I suppose my other recommendation would just be that like I said, I've been lucky enough to be able to collaborate and partner with great people who are trying to get these things done out in the field, and specifically with the medical training one that I showed you about getting that in the hands of actual patients. Of course, that's not always possible. We do lots of studies using online recruitment tools like Mechanical Turk. But you know, whenever possible, I think it's very good to be able to re-emphasize those types of lessons and explore them with real populations. We've made a great deal of progress, right, from what was the standard some decades ago, where we would go and we would recruit university undergraduates to interact with these things, who are a 18 to 22-year-old, very, very narrow demographic group. I also have done work with cross-cultural studies, and so I normally emphasize that it's very, very important that you be looking for cross-cultural effects if you are doing that. Often we will restrict studies to US participants or Western participants only, unless we're specifically looking for interaction effects. There was a paper a few ACCIs back that I was looking at the difference between Western participants and participants in India and their levels of trust in institutions, which was a very interesting area that I'd like to get back to. But so as experimentalists, we need to control for that variable among other things. So those are a few suggestions.
Yeah, thank you for all the insights. Do we have any other questions from our audience?
So a question, if there's no questions from the participants. Yeah, thanks, Johnathan, for the very interesting presentation. I have, I guess, two questions. One is related to the team harmony metrics that you propose. I think it's quite nice to have a way to, numerically measure how is the team's, I guess, their collaboration flow and their outcome in terms of is it win-win or lose-lose or the other two conditions. And I guess the metric was designed for dyadic team, so you have two people in the team. Do you think it can be expanded to a multi-people team, like 3, for example?
Absolutely. In fact, this particular graph I showed here was for teams of n equals 5.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is an area that's under review, so I'm not talking too much about it right now, but it is something that we have been able to mathematically show that we can do and build it up to arbitrary team size n. The problem with looking at these metrics is that as you build interaction terms, they scale exponentially with n.
Yeah.
And so one of the nice things about the Harmony Index is that it allows you to effectively continue computing those pairwise dyadic interactions and then still come up with a single scalar number of harmony at the end. That's a little bit more straightforward to calculate.
Yeah.
And works in some ways better than something simpler like geometric mean. So yes, great question.
Right. Thanks.
You had a second?
Yeah. So the second question is about I think it's a quite nice application with the the medical condition where you are negotiating the family, I guess, care's responsibility and trying to convince the parents to get a housekeeper or something. So do you think someone can customize that system so that you feed it the past, let's say, chat history between a child and their parents, so that the agent that you're training on is customized to the personality and I guess the the set of values that the person would be more likely to these are the conditions that I'll never give in, these are things that we could negotiate.
Absolutely, I think that's possible. This is a first attempt here, so you'll notice I brought it up live actually. So we're negotiating with our sibling here, and we're trying to convince them that we need to make help. And so this is, there's a few things that we can say that are prescriptive that are not very good. So we could sort of insult our sibling, which is not generally a very effective thing to do. And we can see that engenders a negative response. And then we can make these commands. So this in some ways is a very scripted system. But absolutely as an extension, and once we have all that real world data I was telling you about, it's something that we'd love to say, could be extended, could be something that would be very customizable to the particular person, especially since this is not intended to be a one-time thing. It's intended to be a training program that you would engage with over time. So the opportunity to make these requests and continue to make these things better as we use them, I think is there. For sure.
Yeah, so you could kind of have the agent even grow based on, okay, in the last chat, I have actually talked with my actual parents, and this is like how conditions have changed and how they're more maybe willing to accept suggestions. And now the agent model also adapt to the current level of what the person is supposed to be. So you always stay, I guess, relevant and helpful for this training.
And one thing I will say for a system like this is that there's always a balance between sort of consistency to a training program and interactivity. This is in some ways an agent that is straightforward, has certain responses. There are certain responses we're looking to train people to use. Specifically, we're trying to train them to use the inference and power framework. And so we're heavily weighting its responses to favor those. We can make it more interactive. And we have other Iago-based agents that can do this. But it's less suitable for a training program. We're not always trying to make the most dynamic, most intelligent seeming agent. We're trying to make the most effective one. And that's, we going back to the earlier question, how do we do, effective practical situations, right? We want to keep in mind the purpose of this. So in this version, we're going very strong for a very basic training program that we want to internalize. Afterwards, if we wanted to make an agent that's much more dynamic and realistic, we might make different decisions based on the data. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting direction.
Right. Thank you, Johnathan. Any other questions?
Thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess.
Hey.